The silver cup trembles in Morovale's hands, and for one heartbeat the entire Great Cedar Hall seems to breathe with him. Alistair Ashford stands in the middle of two witness circles inked onto the stone floor in ash and salt, one inside the other, exactly as Codex demands. The ash line is uneven in one place, where a clerk's sleeve brushed it, and Alistair cannot stop looking at that small flaw while she waits for the room to decide whether truth still has a place here. Her palms are open, her fingers are steady by force, her throat tastes of iron. Across from her, King Caelan Thorne watches as if one more wrong sentence will cost him either his authority or whatever private self he still has. On the dais above, Queen Mother Isolde sits rigid, carved from pale fury, rings flashing at every hard movement of her hand. The torchlight catches the stones on those rings and sends white flares across the cedar walls like brief knives. Chancellor Brine sweats through his collar despite the mountain chill. Morrow lifts his chin and speaks, voice carrying to the rafters with trained clarity. By Armistice Codex of the year 2021, for the settlement of 18,000 acres of winter pasture, witness order shall be named before cup oath, in duplicate circles, under full moon authority. He does not look at Brine, he looks at the ledger, then at the witness ring, and then at the assembled court that has always underestimated him. The order entered tonight by Chancellor Brine differs from the original sovereign ledger. A murmur breaks, surges, dies. Alistair does not turn, but she can feel Caelan's eyes on her spine. She can feel Isolde's hostility at the back of her neck. She can also feel her wolf, no longer trapped in panic, no longer bent by the memory of the first night, standing alert in her chest. Brine's voice cracks. That copy is unsanctioned. Morrow raises the leather-bound book with both hands. This bears seal pressure from both delegations. I checked every oath word the night your men confiscated the archive chest and told me to keep pouring. His gaze flicks to Isolde and returns to the witness ring. The crown claim right was invoked against an unsworn party under falsified order. It is unlawful. Isolde rises. Objection. Sit, Caelan says. The word lands like drop stone. No one moves. The cup in Morrow's hands stills. Alistair hears old cedar beams creak overhead, hears the wind outside scrape at shutters, hears the shift of armor as guards hold position. She hears her own pulse counting the distance between humiliation and this edge of reversal. 3 nights. 3 exact nights from public ruin to this knife-thin opening. Caelan descends from the dais one step at a time, boots sounding against stone in the hush. Before this hall and both circles, he says, voice rough with restraint, I will hear the original oath in full. Morrow nods once and begins to recite. As the words unfurl, the hall pulls backward in Alistair's mind, to before the ash circles, before the forged ledger, before the moment she refused to bow, back to the beginning of the banquet where her life split in two. Years before this night, in 2012, snow came early and hard over the border hills. It did not arrive in gentle drifts. It arrived in wind-packed walls that swallowed fence lines and made familiar ground look like open white sea. Sheep froze where they stood. Carts tipped and vanished. Men could walk 10 paces from their own barns and fail to find the doors again. High Fang herders drove their animals downslope into River March winter pasture and called it necessity. River March riders drove them back and called it law. Neither side believed the other's claim was made in good faith. By spring, necessity and law had become a cycle of reprisals no one controlled for long. Everyone remembered the story differently, and each version grew teeth over time. High Fang lords said River March granaries were full while mountain villages starved. River March wardens said High Fang raiders crossed under storm cover, cut marks from ear tags, and renamed theft as survival. In taverns and council rooms, details changed, but graves did not. By the time Alistair was old enough to sit in her father's council, People had stopped arguing over the first incursion and started counting funerals by season. 18,000 acres became less a map notation than a chain of names spoken at memorial tables. Alistair learned to read those names before she learned court dance patterns. Her father would lay waxed maps flat and trace disputed lines with a knife tip, then ask her to repeat not only where the line ran, but who grazed north of it in late frost, who grazed south, who had kin on both sides, who had lost sons and would never forget. He told her, "When leaders talk about land, they are usually talking about fear and inheritance at the same time." She never forgot that lesson, even when she wished she could. In 2021, after 9 winters of raids, retaliations, burned barns, border disappearances, and morning fires that seemed to relight as soon as ash cooled, the armistice was signed. Not peace, armistice. A formal pause waited with deadlines and clauses sharp enough to cut both sides if handled badly. One line in particular sat inside the document like a blade hidden in velvet. Within 5 years, under a full moon, Hai Fang and River March would hold a treaty banquet and seal terms with a shared cup oath before duplicate witness circles. Within 5 years sounded spacious when ink was wet. It felt like a narrowing corridor by late 2025. By the time the moon date in 2026 approached, every court faction called the banquet inevitable while quietly preparing to weaponize it. Alistair came to Hai Fang as envoy heir because her mother was dead, her father's lungs were failing, and River March needed someone who understood both treaty text and the theater around it. She wore iron gray silk instead of morning black because foreign courts read color as weakness before they read language. She brought sealed letters, grazing surveys, revenue tables, and a private instruction from her father written in his increasingly unsteady hand. "Do not kneel where no oath compels it." The great cedar hall had been built to reduce visitors. Pillars thick as towers climbed into darkness. Carved wolves circled every beam with open jaws and polished teeth. Banners from old conquests hung high enough that one had to tilt back to read them, exposing throat without meaning to. The long banquet tables were angled rather than parallel, making every face visible from the dais and denying private clusters. Hidden galleries carried music down from above. From below, it sounded festive until the drumline shifted and revealed old war cadence under the melody. Morrow Vale met her at the threshold with a cup tray balanced on one palm and a bruise darkening his wrist where someone had gripped too hard. The bruise was fresh enough to shine purple under the gold sconces. "Envoy Ashford," he said in formal tones for nearby ears, but his eyes were urgent. "The seating changed afternoon, Council." She caught the warning immediately. "By whose order?" Chancellor Brine posted the revised chart. His gaze flicked toward the dais before returning to neutral. He cited ceremonial precedents. He had a specific talent, delivering danger in plain words while appearing to discuss routine logistics. Inside, Alistair found her place moved from the central negotiator's bench to an offset seat near the pillar line, close enough to be seen by everyone, too far to answer quickly if addressed from the throne. Her packet of speaking motions, prepared with Brine's office 2 days earlier and confirmed with 3 signatures, was gone from the place marker. In its place sat a polished antler token she did not recognize, carved with the Thorne family knot. A slight, yes, but the timing made it feel more than that. She signaled her aide. The young woman disappeared toward records and returned pale and breathing too fast. "No one in records has your motions, my lady. They say you delivered none. They said they have no intake stamp." "Of course they said that," Alistair answered quietly, folding her hands so no one saw the tension in them. Across the hall, King Kaelin Thorne entered to the strike of bronze drums. Hai Fang courtiers stood first. River March delegates followed, some with visible reluctance. Alistair rose with the room and catalogued what mattered. The half-second pause before Kaelin took the center position, the way his gaze swept the delegations. the way it caught on her and held an instant too long. The tightness in his jaw as if he were bracing against a blow not yet landed. Kalen was younger than the war and older than innocence. He had inherited a court still organized around his mother's regency habits. Rumors described him as either a ruthless opportunist or a reformer, trapped in ancestral machinery, depending on who was speaking. In person, he looked less theatrical than rumor and far more tired. When welcome speeches concluded and first service cleared, Brine rose with a scroll and announced, "Consolidation of political confidence through clarifying declarations." Alistair's shoulders went cold. Clarifying declarations were not in the printed order circulated at dusk. Kalen's hand tightened on his chair arm. Isolde tilted her head in approval, giving Brine space. "Before any cup oath," Brine announced, voice smooth and carrying, "the Crown acknowledges concern among Hai Fang's noble houses regarding suitability of prospective treaty consort status." Silence dropped hard. Alistair understood one heartbeat before he spoke her name. "Envoy Heir Alistair Ashford has been deemed unfit consort by royal discretion," Brine continued, "and therefore excluded from any marital political interpretation of tonight's accord." No laughter followed. High courts rarely laugh at planned humiliation. They signal consent through composed faces and slight nods. Several nobles exchanged satisfied glances. Rivermarch delegates stiffened, anger trapped behind diplomacy. Isolde watched as though ticking off an item from a prepared list. Kalen stood. For one brief second, Alistair thought he might stop the declaration. Instead, he said, "Clear enough for all tables." "The declaration stands." Heat rose up Alistair's neck. Her hearing narrowed to a rushing blur and then sharpened painfully. She could feel every eye in the hall pretending not to look directly at her. She knew the law permitted this. Rejection before formal bond, before cup oath, was legal by custom, yet legal did not make it less targeted. She inclined her head exactly 1 degree. "Your Majesty's prerogative is acknowledged." The words left a metallic taste in her mouth. She had not come to Hai Fang seeking romance in ceremonial clothing. She had come to negotiate border governance. What shook her was not personal rejection, it was strategic framing. Remove her status publicly, then any coercion afterward could be presented as containment instead of design. Morrow appeared at her elbow as courses shifted, setting down water she had not requested. "You are not finished," he murmured without moving his lips. "No," she whispered. "I am not." Music resumed, brittle and too bright. Brine smiled into his cup. Isolde spoke with 3 dukes about grain levies as if nothing unusual had occurred. Kalen did not drink. The banquet progressed toward the bowing rite. In Hai Fang custom, the Queen Mother's entrance during Treaty Moon formalized dynastic continuity. Every sworn vassal knelt. Foreign delegates generally followed in symbolic form to avoid scandal and to keep trade negotiations from collapsing over gesture. Brine's revised seating had placed Alistair in direct line with Isolde's processional route, so any hesitation would be visible from both delegations. Morrow reappeared carrying the ceremonial horn cup and bent as if to pour. "Listen," he breathed. "No one has recorded your fealty. They asked for your signature this afternoon. I delayed." Her pulse jumped. Why delay? Because the phrasing was wrong. It bound bloodline, not office. She looked at him fully then. "Morrow Vale, if I refuse to bow without sworn fealty." "You trigger law," he said. "If you bow, this closes over you and no one can reopen it quickly." He moved away before she could answer. The herald's staff struck stone 3 times. "Her Majesty, Queen Mother Isolde Thorne." The hall rose and folded. Nobles knelt. Guards knelt. Rivermarch delegates knelt in uncertain imitation. Kalen knelt on 1 knee beside the dais per filial ceremonial code. Alistair remained standing. Not through leisurely thought. through a total refusal that surged through her body until her back locked straight and her legs would not bend. Every survival instinct said kneel and recover, later. Something deeper refused. The scrape of silk and armor as people shifted to stare made a harsh whisper across the hall. Isolde stopped 3 paces from Alistair. "Envoy Ashford," she said softly, "you forget yourself." Alistair kept her gaze level. "I acknowledge no personal fealty oath to your majesty." Brine sprang up. "Per custom, attendance implies... attendance implies witness," Morrow Vale said from the cup line, voice suddenly carrying to the upper gallery. He stepped into open sight, hands still around the pitcher. "Not fealty. No oath signature exists in archive for Envoy Ashford to the Queen Mother's person." Heads turned fast enough that several chains and ornaments clinked. Isolde's face stayed smooth, which was how one recognized her anger. "Who authorized this interruption?" Morrow bowed from the waist without kneeling. "No one, Your Majesty. The ledger did." Kaelin rose slowly. The tension through the chamber changed texture. Less ceremony, more threat. For a moment, Alistair thought she saw relief behind his restraint. Then political calculus dropped over his expression again. Isolde turned to the assembly. "In light of this unprecedented breach, and to preserve treaty leverage, I invoke crown claim right." Gasps erupted at once. Envoy Ashford is placed under provisional bond service as collateral pending ritual clarity. There it was, the mechanism she had sensed since her arrival. Crown claim right was an emergency instrument from older dynastic eras. It could compel temporary service for continuity. It could not compel permanent marriage. Charter language capped it at 90 days. 90 days, however, was enough to strip rank, isolate a negotiator, and rewrite public narrative. Alistair spoke before fear slowed her. On what grounds? On grounds of ceremonial insubordination jeopardizing interrealm accord. Isolde smiled with no warmth. "You may contest at rehearing within prescribed nights, if your side can produce orderly witness." Brine unrolled another scroll as if he had rehearsed the motion. Kaelin did not intervene. He looked at Alistair, and she saw the split in him plainly. King and son, legitimacy and immediate control. Then he looked away, and the rite was entered. Afterward, while courtiers resumed conversation with strained brightness, guards escorted Alistair to state apartments now classified as honored restraint. Heavy doors, carved lintels, polished furniture, fixed windows, guards at both ends of the corridor. It was prison wrapped in protocol. Morrow slipped inside moments before the outer lock was set, carrying a tray no one had requested. He placed it on the table, moved through the chamber to check wall grills and carved vents for listening tubes, then finally exhaled. "Say it," Alistair told him. "They wanted your humiliation first, so claim would read as corrective rather than predatory." He drew a folded scrap from his sleeve. Kitchen runner saw brine burning draft lists. I took one before it hit flame. The page held 2 seating charts, original and revised. Her name had been shifted to the sightline position. Witness order columns were altered. A note in Brine's hand sat in the margin. Reposition for visible noncompliance. Alistair sat down slowly. He engineered the angle. Yes. And witness order? Not matching armistice appendix. If that held, everything hinged there. Hai Fang's court was formalist to the edge of absurdity. Sequence mattered in codified ways, outsiders mocked, and then lost to in legal chambers. She looked up. "Can we prove it?" Morrow's mouth tightened. "Maybe. Archive room is sealed. Brine controls clerk access and transfer logs. Then we stop asking clerks." Outside, midnight bells rolled over the city, each strike damped by snow clouds and distance. By dawn, rumor outran fact. Alistair became whatever story each faction needed. Arrogant foreign envoy, unstable wolf soul, scheming near consort, Failed bride. Useful warning. River March's delegation head requested extraction and was denied under active Crown claim custody terms. High Fang pamphleteers praised Isolde's firm maternal governance in treaty emergency. Someone chalked Stander on Alistair's corridor door and misspelled even that insult. Kaelin sent no message. On the first day under claim, Alistair did what humiliated people are often pushed not to do. She documented everything. She counted doors, locks, guards, shift timing, and which officials avoided her eyes. She reconstructed the banquet minute by minute. Where Brine stood, who carried which scroll, when Isolde entered, where Kaelin looked during the declaration. She wrote every spoken line she could remember and marked where unscheduled language appeared. Morrow supplied names under his breath while refilling lamps. Archive porter, lamp trimmer, junior clerk with gaming debts, scribe apprentice to Brine who had cried after being ordered to reseal wax. By midday she had not freedom, but she had structure. She used meal deliveries to pass coded requests to River March aides through napkin folds and cup placement. One reply came back hidden under the plate rim. Delegation Council confirms oral rehearing still valid if written petition obstructed. Another came from a kitchen scullion loyal to no one but overtime pay. Brine's assistants had moved old ledgers to Undercroft after midnight. On the second day, Alistair invoked Claw's right of contested collateral and requested audience with Kaelin. He granted 15 minutes in the old Falcon chamber, a room designed for imbalance with narrow windows, cold draft, and no chairs of equal height. He arrived without crown, wearing a dark coat with winter salt on the hem. A single guard remained outside. His face looked as if he had slept in fragments. "You asked for this," he said. "I did." Alistair stayed standing. "Why reject me publicly?" He flinched, very small and very real. "Because 3 border dukes told me they would walk before cup oath if they believed I meant to fold River March into bloodline through you. If they walked, treaty collapsed. If treaty collapsed, warline reopens by snow. So you used me as proof?" "I bought hours," he said sharply, then lowered his voice. "I thought I could stabilize after right. And when your mother invoked crown claim, I did not authorize it. You did not stop it." Silence stretched. Wind pushed against the narrow window glass. Kaelin stepped closer, anger controlled but visible. "You think I don't know what she is doing? She has governed through regencies for 20 years and calls it continuity. If I break her publicly without clean procedure, half this court calls it sacrilege against lineage. Reform dies, and then border lords own me." Alistair held his gaze. "Then give me procedure." He gave a short, exhausted laugh. "Do you have any?" Brine altered witness order and seating to stage breach. "Can you prove it?" "I can if archive seals are still honest." He looked toward the slit window where snowmelt dripped from carved stone. Brine handled archive transfer himself after Banquet. "Convenient." "Risky," Kaelin replied. "For him, if you can connect it." He turned back. 3 nights from claim invocation rehearing can be petitioned in same hall with duplicate witness circles and cup ritual. You know this. I know. If your proof fails, my mother keeps you under service up to 90 days. River March may interpret that as hostage condition. Then we prepare for no failure. He studied her for a long moment. "Why didn't you bow?" She answered plainly. No oath was sworn. A flicker crossed his face, almost a smile, and gone. Morrow Vale said the same. "Morrow remembers oath text better than your clerks. Use that." Kaelin nodded once. "I can ensure rehearing petition is accepted if filed within rule. I cannot appear to coach your argument." "I am not asking for coaching. I am asking for access." "You'll have the hall." As she moved to leave, he said quietly, "Rejection before cup oath was lawful by custom. I used lawful action for faction control. I know what that cost you." She did not soften. Then cover part of that cost now. In the corridor back, she passed Brine beneath hunting tapestries faded by smoke and age. He bowed with crafted sympathy. Envoy, these events have been unfortunate. Unfortunate, she repeated, like witness order changing by itself. His smile stayed in place. Ritual documentation is delicate, especially under pressure. So is office tenure. His eyes flickered before he resumed composure. That night, Morrow Vale brought contraband hidden beneath bread rolls, wax impression kit, charcoal rub sheets, and a key pattern pressed into stale crust. Archive subdoor, he whispered, from Porter who dislikes Brine enough to help. Why help us? Brine docked his widow pension over mislabeled antler tax records. He has been waiting to return the favor. They moved after a second bell when patrols rotated and corridor noise dropped. Morrow wore servant gray and carried a cleaning pail, invisible by familiarity. Alistair wore a cloak over plain dress, face shadowed. The archive undercroft smelled of dust paste, old hide glue, and damp cedar. Shelves climbed into darkness. Iron lattice cabinets held sealed folios. Morrow's hands moved quickly and carefully. Armistice annexes, corridor tithes, grazing assessments. Here. He drew out the 2021 ledger, heavier than it looked. Seals pressed deep from both realms. They set it on a side table and compared it to the Banquet copy Morrow had salvaged. At a glance, they matched. On close reading, inconsistencies appeared. Line 7, Morrow whispered, tracing with a gloved fingertip. Original clerk leaves open tail G in garnet circle. Copy has closed tail form. Different hand. Could be authorized recopy, Alistair said. Then transcript notation and date mark should appear at margin. They do not. He turned pages. And witness list, third and fifth positions swapped. Original third witness is River March, neutral observer. Copy substitutes palace chaplain attached to Isolde. Alistair felt her pulse in her throat. If that substitution stands, first night right lacked valid sequence. Yes? They worked quickly, charcoal rubs of critical lines, wax impressions of seals, folio numbers copied twice, one set hidden in Alistair's sleeve hem, one in Morrow's cup tray lining. Footsteps echoed in corridor. They killed the candle and pressed into shadow behind a shelf, while two night clerks argued about ale ration cuts and moved on without entering. When they reached Alistair's rooms again, her knees shook from delayed fear. They laid evidence beside her reconstruction notes. The pattern aligned too cleanly to deny. Seat moved for visibility, motions removed, declaration inserted, witness order altered, claim invoked at engineered flashpoint, petition route obstructed. On the morning of day 3, Brine countered. At breakfast, a notice arrived on embossed palace stock. Rehearing petition challenged for defective sponsor signature. The sponsor named was Baron Eld Varn, deceased 18 months. Morrow swore softly. He's running the clock. If we miss tonight, claim holds. Alistair read the notice, then set it down. Then we file orally at noon council and force acceptance in open chamber. They may deny floor. Not if I invoke collateral contest clause in front of both delegations. Let them deny it publicly if they dare. They entered noon council under a canopy of whispers. Isolde presided in winter white velvet, expression composed. Brine sat below with stacked documents arranged like fortification walls. Kaelin came in late, unreadable. When petition hour closed, Alistair stepped into central aisle. Point of urgent procedural privilege. Brine snapped, "You are out of order!" Alistair projected her voice to the galleries. Collateral subject invoking rehearing right within 3-night limit under Crown Claim Charter. The chamber shifted. Officials who disliked her still leaned in. Procedure made everyone attentive. Isolde smiled thinly. Your written petition is defective. Then hear oral filing now, before witnesses. Brine rose halfway. Improper and disruptive. Kalen cut across him. Not improper. Oral filing is permitted where written path is obstructed. He kept his eyes forward. Accepted. Isolde's grip tightened on her armrest. Very well. Rehearing tonight. Great Cedar Hall. Duplicate circles as required. At the side wall, Morrow Vale exhaled once, almost inaudible. By twilight the hall was more crowded than opening night. Nobles, delegates, guildheads, officers, priestly observers, and extended kin packed benches and galleries. People who had watched Alistair's humiliation now came to watch her fall again or stand up. Same pillars, same dais, same carved wolves. Legitimacy demanded the same room where harm had been done. 2 witness circles were repainted under joint supervision from both delegations. Cup vessels were rinsed and inspected where all could see. Brian objected repeatedly to delays as theatrics, which only deepened suspicion. When Isolde entered, protocol for rehearing did not require kneeling. Some still bowed. Fewer knelt. She noticed. Morrow Vale took position as cupbearer and designated memory witness, a role shift that shocked traditionalists and energized everyone else. He met Alistair's eyes once, steady. Brian opened with a long argument about stability, dynastic dignity, and foreign opportunism. He spoke for nearly half an hour, citing partial clauses and omitting qualifying language whenever possible. Alistair waited without interruption, then answered with dates, text, and copies. Armistice signed 2021, she said, holding up the rub sheet. Banquet held 2026 under treaty deadline. Validity clause requires witness order named before cup oath in 2 circles. First night sequence was altered. Here are seal and hand inconsistencies. Brian gave a sharp laugh. Forgery assembled in confinement. Morrow stepped forward. Then test from memory against original. He closed his eyes briefly. Line 13. No bloodline fealty may be presumed by attendance, only by named oath before duplicated witness circles. Was that read first night, Chancellor? Brian hesitated. One beat, then another. Summary reading was sufficient given time. Not under codex language, Morrow said. Gasps crossed the room. Isolde stood. Enough quibbling over script forms. The envoy stood in ceremonial defiance before the Queen Mother. Claim invocation stands regardless. Alistair turned to face her directly. Only if I owed personal fealty. I did not swear it. Archive contains no signature to your person. Custom compels respect. I offered respect. I did not, and do not concede unsworn submission. Kalen sat at center seat with hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Brian attempted his final legal route. Even if minor irregularity occurred, emergency powers cure defect. Morrow answered before Alistair spoke. Emergency powers cannot legalize a fabricated trigger. Crown claim can compel temporary service and no more than 90 days. It cannot erase witness law. A senior jurist in Old House colors leaned toward his counterpart and whispered audibly, "He is correct on the cap and trigger." The room's momentum shifted in a visible wave. Kalen rose. "Read the original in full." Brian stammered. "Your Majesty, full recitation is unnecessary." "Read," Kalen said again. Brian did not move. Morrow lifted the original ledger and began reciting himself, voice clear and measured. Clause after clause landed in the places Brian had tried to blur. At the line barring presumed bloodline fealty by attendants, several nobles murmured curses. At the witness order clause, scribes from both delegations raised independent copies in confirmation. Isolde descended the dais steps, skirts whispering over stone. She stopped before Kalen and spoke low, but the hall was quiet enough to catch it. "If you let this stand, you empty the crown," Kalen answered in the same low register. "I remove what breaks it." He turned to the hall. Ruling. Silence swallowed the chamber. By codified protocol, First night Crown claim invocation against envoy heir Alistair Ashford is void for defective witness order and unsworn fealty premise. Coercive bond service terminates immediately. He shifted his gaze to Brine. Chancellor Brine is charged with falsifying witness order, obstructing petition filing, and abusing archive seal authority. Take him into custody. Guards moved before Brine could retreat. He shouted about conspiracy, about preserving monarchy, about servant overreach. One guard gagged him and marched him toward the side exit. Isolde did not raise her voice. She looked at Kaelin with controlled disbelief. You choose her over blood? I choose enforceable legitimacy over staged authority, he said. Alistair expected triumph and felt instead a wave of release so strong her hands trembled. Kaelin lifted his voice again. Public harm was done in this hall. Public restoration will be done here. He stepped down from the dais to stand one pace from Alistair inside the inner witness circle where she had stood alone 3 nights earlier. Before both delegations, he said, I rescind the declaration of unfitness as politically coercive and procedurally tainted. A ripple moved through the hall. Rejection before cup oath was lawful by custom. I exercised that law for faction management. Its consequences were then exploited into unlawful claim. I accept responsibility for that chain. No High Fang monarch in recent memory had admitted tactical misuse of lawful discretion in open session. Shock traveled openly across noble faces. Alistair held his gaze. What follows this ruling? Draft what should have been drafted first. He signaled for a neutral clerk, not from Brian's office. Fresh parchment was brought to the cup table. Parity bond charter under revised treaty. Shared authority over border pasture implementation, independent from marital status, binding both crowns through office rather than bloodline possession. Rivermarch delegates stood first, then High Fang reformists, some hesitantly. Isolde let out a short, sharp laugh. You would seat a foreign envoy as equal regent? Kaelin answered without turning. As Crown Treaty regent, yes. Alistair felt the weight of what he was offering and the risks packed inside it. Backlash, sabotage, claims of capitulation, renewed factional pressure from both realms, but the existing structure had already demonstrated its failure. She spoke carefully. State terms. Joint Oversight Council for the 18,000 disputed acres, transparent seasonal allocation metrics published each quarter. Cross-border Ranger Corps under dual command with rotating captains. Dispute arbitration requiring 2 witness circles and published order in advance. No unilateral Crown claim invocation against treaty officers. Morrow whispered, almost to himself. He drafted this before tonight. Alistair heard him and did not look away from Kaelin. Add clause. Hall Witness Office independent of Royal Household staffing, appointed by joint vote, removable only by dual council cause. Kaelin's eyes flicked briefly toward Morrow Vale. Accepted. Morrow's breath caught. Then I sign, Alistair said. The clerk laid parchment flat at the cup table. 2 seals, 2 signatures, 2 witness circles around them. Alistair signed first, title line deliberate, Alistair Ashford, Crown Treaty Regent. Kaelin signed beside her, hand steady. Witnesses from both delegations stepped in sequence and marked attestation. Morrow logged the order, each name spoken clearly. When the final witness completed mark, the hall remained quiet for several seconds, as if everyone needed time to understand the institutional shift they had just watched. Dawn came with low cloud and steel-colored light. Regency Council convened emergency session under charter authority. Isolde arrived in morning purple, posture flawless, expecting to contain damage through procedural maneuver. Instead, charges were read. Ritual breach through unlawful claim pressure, attempted procedural capture through chancellor collusion, not treason, not exile, loss of regency vote pending review, surgical, immediate, politically devastating. Vote tally came quickly. The overnight amendment passed. Queen Mother retained title and residence rights. Regency vote removed until final tribunal. Isolde stood still as the verdict clerk finished, then turned toward Alistair at the new treaty bench. "Do not confuse this chamber's mood for lasting protection," she said quietly. "Courts remember affront." Alistair answered at the same volume. "Then the record should remain accurate." Isolde departed without bowing. Brine was transferred in iron cuffs to custody vault below East Tower pending trial before mixed panel. His shouting echoed through lower corridors, then cut off behind thick doors. 3 days after humiliation, Alistair walked again into Great Cedar Hall, this time at morning hour. No musicians, no crowd crush. Sunlight through high, clear-story windows replaced torch smoke. Workers scrubbed ash and salt circles from stone, though faint rings remained visible in angled light. Morrow Vale stood beside the central pillar wearing new insignia. Hall witness chain, still too bright against plain tunic. He touched it once as if confirming it existed. "It suits you," Alistair said. "It feels heavier than a tray," Morrow replied, then looked toward the ledger stand. "Not in a bad way. You have always carried more than trays." He gave her a quick, tired smile. "Today, at least, people heard me before interrupting." Kaelin entered without fanfare, accompanied by one guard who stopped at distance. He halted a respectful pace away from both of them. "River March accepted preliminary charter transmission?" "After 12 objections, 2 delay motions, and a threat to recall me, yes," Alistair said. "They request acreage audit by independent surveyors before spring movement." "Granted. We should publish methodology jointly so neither side can claim hidden waiting." "Agreed." A pause followed. Not warm, not hostile, simply honest about what remained unresolved. Kaelin said, "I cannot undo the banquet night." "No. I can make different choices after it. Then make them consistently." He inclined his head. "Regent." "Your Majesty." Morrow Vale moved to the ledger desk and opened the morning register. "First oath entry for charter implementation?" he asked. Alistair looked to Kaelin. Kaelin nodded. Together they stepped into position and spoke the short administrative oath in turn, while Morrow recorded each word in careful script, pausing only once to blot ink. Outside, bells marked first hour. In border valleys far from Cedar Halls, shepherds would soon test newly marked routes. Ranger captains from both realms would meet, mistrust each other, and still have to file shared reports. Nobles would draft objections. Pamphleteers would print distortions. Old families would probe for weaknesses in the new charter language. Inside this hall, however, a public rejection had been answered by public restoration before the same witnesses, under the same roof where the damage occurred. The refusal to bow had become legal foundation rather than isolated scandal. Brine's tampering had moved from rumor to charge sheet. Morrow Vale's memory, once treated as servant detail, now stood at the center of treaty enforcement. Alistair walked toward the threshold where she had first entered as envoy heir under measured hostility. She paused and looked back once, at twin thrones now occupied with visible caution, at the empty space where Isolde had enforced ritual fear, at Morrow Vale writing the day's first completed oath into official record with deliberate care. 3 nights had changed the machinery of power without changing how dangerous it remained. She did not mistake the moment for peace. She recognized it as a structure worth defending. Then she turned toward the sunlit courtyard, and her wolf moved with her, alert, unbowed, and fully her own.